$30 million worth of exotic cars sat under the lights of Hart Automotive's flagship workshop. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, McLarens, machines so rare that most people would never see one in person. At the center of them all stood the company's newest prototype, a vehicle investors believed could change the future of the luxury performance market. The demonstration was supposed to be perfect. Investors had flown in from 3 different countries. Executives filled the observation platform above the workshop floor. Engineers moved between vehicles with tablets and laptops in hand. Everything had been rehearsed down to the minute. Then a delivery driver walked through the wrong door. He carried a small parts box under one arm. His jacket was worn. His boots showed years of work. He looked completely out of place among the polished floors, carbon fiber displays, and million-dollar machines. The CEO noticed him immediately. Olivia Hart had spent 15 years building the company into one of the most respected names in high-performance engineering. She believed in standards. She believed in professionalism. And in a single glance, she decided the man standing near her prototype belonged nowhere near her workshop. The investors watched. The engineers listened. The room grew quiet as Olivia pointed toward the exit and made it clear that people like him did not belong in places like this. The delivery driver did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not explain who he was. Instead, his attention drifted to the prototype sitting under the lights. For a brief moment, his eyes settled on a component near the rear cooling assembly. Something about it made him stop, something nobody else in the room noticed. Then, he quietly turned and walked away. 20 minutes later, the demonstration collapsed. The prototype failed. The investors watched in disbelief. The engineering team panicked. And the same CEO, who had ordered a delivery driver out of her workshop, was about to discover that the man she dismissed knew more about every vehicle in that building than anyone else alive. Because long before Hart Automotive became a billion-dollar company, before the patents, before the investors, before the fame and recognition that delivery driver had helped build the foundation underneath every single car sitting in her garage, and nobody remembered his name. Before we continue, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We bring you a new story every single week, stories about hidden talent, second chances, and the moments that change everything. Now let me take you back 15 years, back before Hart Automotive existed. Back to a small warehouse with leaking windows, borrowed tools, impossible dreams, and 3 young engineers who believed they were building the future. Ethan Reeves woke at 5:35 without an alarm. The house was quiet in the way houses became quiet before dawn, when the world outside had not fully decided to begin, and every sound seemed larger than it actually was. He started the coffee maker. While it brewed, he prepared Maya's breakfast the same way he had every weekday for the past 3 years. Oatmeal on low heat, vitamins on a small saucer, orange juice in the short glass she preferred for reasons she had once explained in great detail, and had never felt the need to explain again. At 6:20 he knocked twice on her bedroom door. Maya appeared 8 seconds later. She always did. She carried the small notebook she took almost everywhere. Most children filled notebooks with drawings. Maya filled hers with observations, things people said, things people meant but did not say, questions she wanted to think about later. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and immediately opened it. Ethan smiled. The notebook usually meant trouble. Not bad trouble, thinking trouble. The kind that required answers. Maya looked up and asked whether he had deliveries that day. He told her there were 3 ordinary parts deliveries and 1 to Hart Automotive. That got her attention. Everyone in the city knew Hart Automotive. Their commercials appeared everywhere. Their prototype vehicles filled magazines. Their CEO appeared on business covers and conference stages and interviews about innovation and leadership. Maya asked if that was the company with the $1 million cars. Ethan said it was. She wrote something. He did not ask what. He had learned years ago that Maya shared information exactly when she decided it was ready to be shared. Not before. Never before. Breakfast continued quietly. Outside, the first traces of sunrise were beginning to appear. Eventually, Maya looked up again and asked if the people at Hart Automotive knew who he was. The question surprised him, not because it was difficult, because it was specific. He thought about it. Then he told her probably not. The company was much bigger now than it had once been. Most people there would never have heard his name. Maya studied him for a moment before writing something else. He noticed the look. The look meant she was building toward a larger question. Sure enough, she was. On the drive to school 20 minutes later, she finally asked it. She stared out the passenger side window as the city moved past. Then she asked how a person knew when someone was judging them without knowing anything about them. Ethan glanced at her. It was not a question most 8-year-olds asked before school. Then again, Maya was not most 8-year-olds. He considered the answer carefully. Finally, he said that most people looked at where someone was standing and assumed that was the whole story. Very few people asked how they got there. Maya nodded slowly. Then she wrote the sentence down. She did not ask a follow-up question. That meant she liked the answer. He dropped her off at school at 7:25. He watched her disappear through the entrance doors. Then he drove across town toward his workshop. Reeves Restoration sat on a side street behind a warehouse district that most people never noticed. The building was old. The paint was faded. The sign above the entrance had been repaired 3 times. From the outside, it looked ordinary. Inside, it was something else. The workshop contained projects in various stages of completion: a 1967 Aston Martin, a rare Alfa Romeo coupe, 2 vintage motorcycles. Components organized with the precision of a person who understood that disorder cost time and time cost money. Ethan had built the workshop slowly, not through investors, not through loans, one project at a time, one customer at a time. The same way his father had built his own business decades earlier. There was a photograph above the main workbench. 3 young engineers standing beside a skeletal vehicle frame inside an unfinished warehouse. Most visitors assumed it was an old racing project. Nobody paid much attention to it. Ethan almost never looked at it anymore. The past had become something he carried rather than something he visited. At 8 o'clock, he loaded the day's deliveries into the van. 1 box contained specialized components for a restoration client. Another contained calibration parts for a local performance shop. The third was addressed to Hart Automotive. He secured the cargo, closed the rear doors, started the engine, then sat for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel. Not because he was nervous, not because he was excited, simply because Hart Automotive was one of the few places in the city connected directly to a life he had not thought about in years. The company was enormous now. The headquarters occupied an entire campus. Thousands of employees worked there. Investors flew in from around the world. Newspapers described it as one of the most innovative automotive firms of its generation. 15 years earlier, it had been a leaking warehouse, 3 engineers, and an idea nobody thought would work. Ethan had been there on the first day. Now he was delivering parts to the front gate. Life had a sense of humor sometimes. He put the van into gear, pulled onto the road, and drove toward a company that no longer remembered the man who helped build it. 15 years before the investors, the prototypes, and the headlines, Hart Automotive existed inside a warehouse that leaked when it rained. The building sat at the edge of an industrial district where nobody expected important things to happen. The roof needed repairs. The heating worked only when it wanted to. The office furniture had been purchased secondhand from a company that had gone bankrupt. The entire operation consisted of 3 engineers and an idea. The idea was simple. Most high-performance manufacturers built completely different platforms for every vehicle they produced. It was expensive, slow, inefficient. The three engineers believed there was a better way. A single modular architecture. One engineering foundation that could be adapted into multiple performance vehicles without sacrificing quality, speed, or innovation. Investors hated the idea. Industry experts dismissed it. Manufacturers said it couldn't be done. The three engineers built it anyway. One of them was Ethan Reeves. Another was Olivia Hart. The third was Marcus Hale. Back then, nobody was a CEO. Nobody was famous. Nobody owned a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They were simply three people working impossible hours in pursuit of something they believed should exist. Ethan was the youngest. He was also the most gifted. Not because he was smarter than everyone else. Because he saw systems differently. Where other engineers saw individual components, Ethan saw relationships, connections, patterns, how one decision affected 20 others that had not happened yet. It was a rare skill, the kind that made difficult problems look obvious after he explained them. Many of the platform concepts that eventually became the foundation of Hart Automotive began as sketches on Ethan's workbench. The cooling architecture, the modular suspension mounting system, the adaptable drivetrain framework. The patent filings would eventually include contributions from many engineers, but the earliest versions often began with Ethan standing at a drafting table long after everyone else had gone home. Marcus handled development testing. Olivia handled strategy and investors. Ethan built. For 3 years, the company survived on determination and borrowed money. Sometimes payroll arrived late. Sometimes suppliers refused to extend credit. More than once, they came within weeks of shutting the doors permanently. Yet somehow they survived. The first breakthrough came during the 4th year. A major investor agreed to fund development of a production prototype. Everything changed. New facilities, new equipment, new opportunities. The future finally appeared reachable. And then Ethan's wife became sick. The diagnosis arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The kind of diagnosis that immediately divides life into before and after. For months he tried to balance both worlds. The company needed him. His family needed him more. He spent mornings at hospitals and nights at the warehouse. He slept very little, worked whenever he could, and watched the future he had imagined become increasingly impossible to maintain. Eventually, reality made the decision for him. His wife required constant care. Their young daughter needed stability. Something had to give. Ethan chose his family. He sold his ownership stake for a fraction of what it would eventually become worth. At the time, it seemed reasonable. The company was still fragile. Nobody knew what it would become. He signed the documents on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus tried to change his mind. Olivia tried too. Neither succeeded. Ethan's decision had already been made. He walked through the warehouse one final time, past the prototype frame, past the drafting tables, past the whiteboards covered in equations and concepts, past the future he had helped create. Then he left. The following morning he was gone. For a while people asked about him. Then less often. Then rarely. New engineers arrived. The company grew. The original warehouse became a larger facility. Then a larger one after that. Investors joined. Patents expanded. Vehicles entered production. The company became successful. Then very successful. Then famous. Years passed. Most employees knew Olivia Hart's story. Most knew Marcus Hale's story. Almost nobody knew Ethan Reeves's story. The company archive still contained his name. Old patent drafts still carried his contributions. The earliest photographs still showed him standing beside the first prototype. But archives are quiet places. And companies moving forward rarely spend much time looking backward. 15 years later, thousands of employees worked for Hart Automotive. Many believed the company had always existed. Many assumed success had been inevitable. Few understood how fragile it had once been. Fewer still remembered the engineer who helped build its foundation and then disappeared before the world arrived to celebrate it, which was why, on that Tuesday morning, when a delivery van pulled into the visitor loading area carrying a parts shipment, nobody recognized the man stepping out of the driver's seat. To the security guards, he was a delivery driver. To the employees walking past him, he was a delivery driver. To the executives preparing for the largest investor demonstration in company history, he was a delivery driver. And to Olivia Hart, the woman who had once built prototypes beside him until midnight in a leaking warehouse, he was about to become something even smaller than that. A problem standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hart Automotive headquarters looked less like a manufacturing facility and more like the headquarters of a technology empire. Glass walls reflected the morning sunlight. Prototype vehicles sat on elevated platforms like museum exhibits. Executives moved through corridors carrying tablets and presentation materials while engineers made final adjustments ahead of the most important demonstration the company had conducted in years. More than $2 billion in potential investment sat inside the building that morning. The prototype vehicle in Bay 1 was the reason. Known internally as Project Orion, it represented 6 years of development and nearly $400 million in research costs. If the demonstration succeeded, Hart Automotive would secure funding for an entirely new generation of vehicles. If it failed, years of planning would suddenly become much more difficult. Nobody intended to let it fail. Olivia Hart arrived on the engineering floor shortly before 10. She wore white as she usually did during public events. It had become part of her professional image over the years. Investors recognized it. Journalists expected it. Employees associated it with important days. Today was definitely an important day. The prototype sat beneath display lighting in the center of the workshop. Investors stood nearby. Senior engineers reviewed final system checks. Marcus Hale moved between stations verifying data. Everything appeared ready. At almost exactly 10:15, Ethan Reeves pulled into the service entrance with a delivery van. The security checkpoint directed him toward the south receiving area. Unfortunately, a temporary construction project had closed the usual corridor. The replacement route was poorly marked. Ethan followed the signs available. The signs led him directly into the engineering floor. He entered carrying a medium-sized parts box. Immediately, he knew he was in the wrong place. The room was too polished, too formal, too important. Dozens of people turned toward him. Investors, engineers, executives, and at the center of all of them stood Olivia Hart. For the briefest moment, Ethan simply looked around. 15 years. That was how long it had been. The old warehouse was gone. The draft tables were gone. The patched concrete floor was gone. Everything had changed. Everything except one thing. The platform underneath the prototype. Even from where he stood, he could recognize it. Certain design philosophies never disappeared. They evolved. But they remained recognizable to the people who created them. His attention drifted toward the rear section of the prototype. Then he noticed something. A cooling manifold connection. Small, easy to miss. Most people would never have looked twice. Ethan did. The connection bothered him immediately. Not because it was obviously wrong, because it looked almost right. And almost right was often more dangerous than completely wrong. Before he could study it further, Olivia saw him. Her attention shifted instantly. Investors were watching. The demonstration was minutes away. A delivery driver carrying a box in the middle of the engineering floor was exactly the kind of disruption she did not want. She assessed him in a single glance. Work boots, delivery jacket, parts box. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong person. The judgment happened automatically. The same way thousands of professional decisions happened every week, only this one was wrong. Very wrong. The conversation stopped. The room became quiet. Engineers looked up from their workstations. Investors turned their attention toward the interruption. Ethan remained where he was, not because he was trying to challenge anyone, simply because he was waiting for directions. Instead, he became the focus of the room. Olivia made it clear that people like him did not belong in the engineering demonstration area, and instructed him to leave immediately and use the proper receiving entrance. A few people laughed, not because the situation was especially funny, because powerful people often gave everyone else permission to laugh. Ethan said nothing. He had experienced versions of this moment before. Different places, different people, same assumption. The years had taught him something useful. Correcting people who had already decided who you were rarely changed their minds. Reality usually did a better job. So he simply nodded. Then his eyes drifted back toward the prototype. The cooling manifold still bothered him. The placement, the angle, the tolerance. Something about it felt wrong. Marcus happened to be standing nearby. Ethan recognized him instantly. Older now. More gray hair. Same posture. Same habit of crossing his arms while thinking. Marcus, however, did not recognize Ethan. Not yet. 15 years changes faces. Before turning toward the exit, Ethan walked past him. As he did, he spoke quietly enough that only Marcus could hear. He mentioned that someone might want to inspect the cooling manifold assembly before the demonstration started. Then he continued walking. Marcus looked at him, confused. The statement seemed oddly specific, but before he could ask anything, Ethan was already moving toward the exit. A few seconds later, he was gone. The door closed behind him. The room immediately returned to business. Investors resumed their conversations. Engineers returned to their stations. Olivia continued preparing for the presentation. Marcus stood still for a moment. Then he looked toward the prototype. The cooling manifold appeared normal. The diagnostics were clean. The testing reports were clean. Everything was clean. Eventually, he dismissed the thought. The warning came from a delivery driver. The engineering reports came from some of the best specialists in the industry. The choice seemed obvious. So, he ignored it. 20 minutes later, he would wish he hadn't. The demonstration began exactly on schedule. From the observation platform above the engineering floor, investors watched as Project Orion rolled slowly onto the presentation stage. Large screens illuminated around the workshop. Technical specifications appeared. Performance projections followed. Engineers monitored data streams from workstations positioned around the prototype. Everything looked perfect. Olivia stood at the center of the presentation, confident, prepared, completely in control. She explained the platform's capabilities, the modular architecture, the efficiency improvements, the future production plans. The investors listened carefully. Some took notes. Others watched the prototype itself. Several had spent months evaluating Hart Automotive before agreeing to attend the demonstration. Today was supposed to confirm what they already believed. That Hart Automotive represented the future. Marcus monitored the live telemetry from a station beside the stage. Every system appeared stable. Temperatures were normal. Pressure readings were normal. Electrical systems were normal. The prototype performed exactly as expected for the first 12 minutes. Then a warning appeared. Just one. Small. Almost insignificant. Marcus noticed it immediately. A cooling system fluctuation. Minor. Nothing serious. The type of variation that occasionally appeared during testing and corrected itself automatically. He continued monitoring. The fluctuation disappeared. Then it returned, this time larger. His attention sharpened. Across the workshop floor, the prototype continued operating normally. The audience noticed nothing. Olivia continued speaking. Investors continued listening. Marcus watched the data. A second warning appeared. Then a third. Suddenly he remembered something. A delivery driver. A parts box. A quiet warning beside the exit door. Check the cooling manifold. Marcus looked up from the screen. The memory arrived so quickly it felt physical. His eyes moved to the rear section of the prototype. The same area Ethan had glanced at. The same area Ethan had mentioned. The same area Marcus had ignored. The warning light flashed again. This time accompanied by a temperature spike. Not catastrophic, not yet, but moving in the wrong direction. Fast, Marcus stood. One engineer nearby noticed, then another. Within seconds, multiple people were watching the telemetry. The numbers were climbing. Olivia saw the movement. Her presentation slowed slightly. Something was wrong. The engineers knew it. The investors sensed it. Then the prototype shut itself down. The silence that followed felt enormous. One moment the room had been filled with confidence and momentum. The next it was filled with confusion. Every screen around the workshop displayed emergency system notifications. The prototype's automated safety protocols had activated. Engineers rushed toward the vehicle. Investors exchanged concerned looks. Olivia stared at the silent machine in disbelief. The demonstration had just collapsed in front of some of the most important people in the industry. Exactly 23 minutes after Ethan Reeves had been told to leave, Marcus was already moving. Not toward the diagnostics, not toward the telemetry, toward the cooling manifold. For the first time that day, he ignored the complex explanations. Instead, he followed the warning, the one he should have investigated earlier. Several engineers gathered around as he removed an access panel. A few seconds later, he found it, a manufacturing tolerance issue within the cooling manifold assembly. Tiny, nearly invisible, but under sustained operating conditions, it created an instability that eventually triggered the protective shutdown. The fault was real. The fault was exactly where Ethan had said it would be. Marcus froze. For several seconds, he simply stared at the component, not because of the fault, because of what the fault meant. The delivery driver had identified a design issue in less than 10 seconds. An issue dozens of engineers had missed. An issue hidden inside a prototype most people in the industry had never even seen. That should not have been possible. Yet it had happened. Olivia arrived moments later. She looked at the component, then at Marcus, then at the engineers surrounding him. Nobody needed to explain what had happened. The expressions on their faces said enough. The delivery driver had been right. The room slowly absorbed the realization. Investors whispered among themselves. Executives exchanged worried looks. Olivia felt something unfamiliar. Not embarrassment, not frustration. Confusion. Deep confusion. Who was he? The question settled over everything. Who notices something like that in seconds? Who walks into a workshop they've never seen before and identifies a hidden design flaw? Who does that carrying a delivery box? Marcus couldn't stop thinking about it. The answer refused to make sense. Eventually, he left the engineering floor and headed toward the archives office. At first, he wasn't entirely sure why. Instinct, mostly. A feeling. A memory he couldn't quite reach. There had been something familiar about the man. Not his face, something else. The way he looked at the prototype. The way he spoke. The certainty. Marcus began searching old company files. Early engineering documents. Development photographs. Original prototype records. The company had digitized most of the archive years ago. Thousands of files. Thousands of names. Thousands of images. He kept searching. Minutes passed. Then he found a photograph. An old warehouse. Leaking roof. Prototype frame. Three young engineers standing beside it. Marcus, Olivia, and Ethan Reeves. Marcus stared at the image. His stomach dropped. He opened another file, then another, then another. Engineering drawings, design reviews, patent drafts, concept reports. Everywhere he looked, the same name appeared. Ethan Reeves. Ethan Reeves. Ethan Reeves. Not occasionally. Repeatedly, every major system in the original platform carried evidence of his work. The cooling architecture, the chassis integration, the thermal management systems, the foundations of the company itself. Marcus sat back in his chair. For several moments he simply stared at the screen. The delivery driver. The man Olivia had thrown out in front of investors. The man nobody recognized. The man who had quietly identified the fault. He wasn't a visitor. He wasn't a mechanic passing through. He wasn't a delivery driver who got lucky. He was one of the people who built Hart Automotive. One of the people who built every vehicle sitting in the workshop, and almost nobody remembered he existed. Marcus stood immediately, grabbed the old photograph, and headed toward Olivia's office. Because the disaster on the engineering floor was about to become the second biggest shock of the day. The first was learning exactly who Ethan Reeves really was. Olivia was reviewing contingency plans for the investors when Marcus entered her office without knocking. Under normal circumstances, he would never have done that. The fact that he had was enough to make her look up immediately. Something was wrong. Not demonstration failure wrong. Something else. Marcus carried an old photograph in one hand and a tablet in the other. His expression was unlike anything she had seen from him in years. It wasn't panic. It wasn't frustration. It was disbelief. The kind that appears when a person discovers something that completely reorganizes their understanding of a situation. Olivia set her notes aside. Marcus placed the photograph on her desk. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. The image was old, very old. A warehouse. Three young engineers. A skeletal prototype frame. Then her eyes moved from left to right and stopped. For several seconds she said nothing. She recognized herself immediately. She recognized Marcus immediately. The third person took slightly longer. Not because she didn't know him. Because she hadn't thought about him in years. Ethan Reeves. The name arrived in her mind before she consciously said it. Marcus nodded. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The office suddenly felt very quiet. Outside the glass walls, employees continued moving through the building. Inside, 15 years seemed to collapse into a few seconds. Olivia picked up the photograph. The warehouse. The prototype frame. The endless nights. The impossible deadlines. The years before success. The years when nobody knew whether the company would survive. And there he was, standing beside them, exactly where he had always been, at the beginning. Marcus opened the files on the tablet. Engineering reports, original design reviews, early platform documents, patent drafts, page after page, project after project. The same name appeared repeatedly, not as a minor contributor, not as a consultant, as a founder, as an architect, as one of the people responsible for building the technical foundation of the entire company. Olivia kept scrolling. Every new document made the realization worse, or perhaps clearer. The cooling architecture, the thermal management systems, the modular platform concepts, the engineering philosophies that still guided development today. Pieces of Ethan existed throughout the company. Everywhere, some had evolved. Some had been modified. Some had expanded into technologies nobody could have imagined 15 years earlier. But the foundation remained. And that foundation had Ethan's fingerprints all over it. Olivia leaned back slowly. The memory returned in fragments. Long nights in the warehouse. Arguments over design decisions. Take out food at midnight. deadlines nobody thought they could meet. She remembered Ethan standing at a workbench surrounded by sketches and prototypes. She remembered him solving problems everyone else thought were impossible. She remembered the day he left. And suddenly she remembered something else. She remembered why. His wife. The hospital visits. The impossible choice. The quiet way he had walked away from everything without asking for sympathy or recognition. At the time, they had all believed they would see him again. Then, years passed. The company grew. Life moved forward, and somehow the memory became buried beneath everything that came after. Until that morning, when she had pointed toward the exit and told him he didn't belong, the realization landed with the force of a physical blow, not because she had embarrassed herself, because she had violated the very principle the company claimed to represent. Merit, capability, achievement. She had spent 15 years telling employees that expertise mattered more than appearances. Then she had looked at a jacket and a delivery box and forgotten her own lesson. Marcus broke the silence. He explained that the cooling manifold issue Ethan identified was real. The engineering team had confirmed it completely. The prototype shutdown would never have happened if they had listened. Olivia nodded slowly. The facts only made the situation worse. Not only had Ethan built much of the company they now operated, he had also prevented a larger failure 20 minutes before it happened. And they had ignored him. Investors were already hearing pieces of the story. Word traveled quickly inside organizations, especially stories like this. By late afternoon, senior executives were discussing Ethan Reeves. Several older employees vaguely remembered the name. A few retired engineers who still consulted for the company remembered him very clearly. Each conversation added another layer, another contribution, another forgotten piece of company history. The story became impossible to ignore. Eventually, Olivia stood. The decision came easily. Some decisions require analysis. Others require action. This was action. She asked security where the delivery records were stored. Within minutes, they had the address associated with the parts shipment. A small restoration workshop across town. Marcus wasn't surprised. For some reason, it fit. Olivia left the headquarters just after 4. No assistants. No executives. No public relations team. Just herself. The drive took 30 minutes. As the city changed around her, so did the buildings. Glass towers became warehouses. Warehouses became small industrial properties. Eventually, she turned onto a side street. The sign above the building read, Reeves Restoration. The workshop looked modest. Nothing about it suggested that one of the most influential engineers in Hart Automotive's history worked inside. Then again, appearances had already proven themselves unreliable that day. She parked, stepped out, and walked toward the entrance. Inside, Ethan was exactly where she should have expected him to be. Working. Not talking about the investors. Not talking about the prototype. Not talking about Hart Automotive. Simply working. The same way he had been working when she first met him 15 years earlier. He looked up when the office door opened. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Built from 15 years of history, Olivia finally stepped forward. And for the first time that day, she didn't speak as a CEO. She spoke as someone who knew she had been wrong, very wrong. Because before anything else could happen, she owed him an apology. Ethan listened to the apology without interrupting. The workshop was quiet, except for the occasional sound of tools from the rear bay. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows and settled across the workbench between them. Olivia finished speaking. Then she waited, not because she expected forgiveness, because she understood she had earned the silence. Ethan looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was simply acceptance. The acceptance of someone who had lived long enough to understand that people sometimes made mistakes, and that carrying every mistake forever eventually became too heavy. He told her that the apology mattered because it was honest. Most people apologized for consequences. Very few apologized for assumptions. Olivia almost smiled. That was exactly what she had done. She had assumed. The workshop fell quiet again. Eventually she looked around. For the first time she truly noticed the place. The projects, the tools, the organization, the craftsmanship. Every bay reflected the same thing. Competence. Not the polished competence displayed in corporate presentations. Real competence. The kind built slowly over years. The kind that didn't need an audience. She suddenly understood why Ethan seemed so unaffected by titles. He had already built something valuable. He simply didn't need everyone else to notice. After a few moments, she explained why she had come. The apology was only part of it. The company had a problem. Not a prototype problem. Not an engineering problem. A culture problem. Somewhere along the way, Hart Automotive had become so large that people had started confusing appearance with expertise, credentials with capability, presentation with understanding, and the events of that morning had exposed it in the most public way possible. She wanted to fix that. The proposal she offered was significant. An executive engineering position, a founding partner title restored publicly, recognition from the board, stock compensation, a compensation package large enough that most people would have accepted before hearing the full details. Ethan listened. Then he shook his head. Olivia wasn't surprised. Part of her had expected exactly that. She asked why. His answer came immediately. Because the offer solved the wrong problem. The company didn't need another executive. The company had plenty of executives. The company needed people who remembered how to learn. That answer stayed with her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan told her he did have an idea. A condition. The same way his father had once passed knowledge to him. The same way knowledge had moved through generations before titles ever existed. He wanted to create something called the Builders Program, not for elite graduates, not for people who already had every opportunity, for overlooked talent, students, young mechanics, future engineers, people who might never get through the front door because someone judged them before asking what they knew. Every year the company would sponsor apprenticeships, real apprenticeships, paid positions, hands-on training, access to engineers, access to workshops, access to opportunities. The kind of opportunity that had once changed Ethan's own life. Olivia listened carefully. The proposal was surprisingly small compared to the executive package she had offered, and somehow it felt infinitely more important. She agreed immediately. Not after negotiation. Not after a board meeting. Immediately, because some ideas are obviously correct the moment you hear them. This was one of them. They shook hands. Not as CEO and employee. Not as executive and consultant. As two people trying to leave something better than they found it. When Olivia finally left the workshop, the sun was beginning to set. For the first time all day, she felt something close to relief. The prototype could be repaired. Investor confidence could be rebuilt. But the lesson from that morning would stay with her much longer than any engineering problem. Some mistakes cost money. Others cost perspective. She intended not to repeat either. Ethan picked Maya up from school at 3:20. The moment she got into the truck, she performed what Ethan privately called her 3-second inspection. A glance. A pause. A conclusion. She had been doing it since she was 6. Maya looked at him. Then she smiled slightly. Interesting day. Ethan laughed. Apparently the inspection had reached its verdict. The drive home passed quietly at first. Then he told her the story. The delivery. The demonstration, the prototype, the failure, the old photographs, the apology, the offer. Everything. Maya listened without interrupting. By the time he finished, they were sitting at a traffic light 3 blocks from home. She looked out the window thoughtfully, then asked the question. The one question that mattered most. She asked whether the CEO had finally remembered who he was. Ethan thought about it. Then, he shook his head. No, that wasn't what happened. The answer seemed to surprise her. He explained that remembering who someone was wasn't the important part. The important part was asking what they knew. Maya considered that carefully. Then, nodded. The light turned green. Neither spoke for the next few minutes. That usually meant she was thinking. When they arrived home, she disappeared into the house and returned carrying her notebook. The same notebook she had brought to breakfast. The same notebook she carried almost everywhere. She sat at the kitchen table and wrote for several minutes. When she finished, she turned the notebook around. Ethan read the sentence. It said, "Some people think the smartest person in the room is the one standing on the stage. Sometimes it's the person carrying the box." He stared at the page, then looked at her. The sentence was simple, accurate, and somehow managed to summarize the entire day better than anything he could have said himself. He smiled. Maya smiled back. Outside, the evening settled over the neighborhood. Inside, a little notebook gained another observation worth keeping. And across the city, Hart Automotive was already beginning work on a program that would give overlooked people a chance to be seen before someone decided they didn't belong. Because the future has a strange habit of hiding in places most people never think to look. 6 months after the investor demonstration, Hart Automotive launched the Builders Program. The first group included young people who had something in common. None of them looked impressive on paper. None came from prestigious backgrounds. None had connections that opened doors automatically. What they had was ability, and someone willing to ask what they knew before deciding where they belonged. Olivia personally attended the opening day. So did Marcus. Ethan stood at the front of the workshop beside a photograph from 15 years earlier, 3 young engineers in a leaking warehouse with more ambition than resources and more belief than certainty. He didn't tell the apprentices about patents. He didn't tell them about investors. He didn't tell them about billion-dollar companies. Instead, he told them something much simpler. Never assume you know someone's value because of where you meet them. The person carrying the box might be the person who built the building. The person standing quietly in the corner might understand the problem better than everyone on the stage. And the future often arrives disguised as someone the world has already decided to overlook. 1 year later, the first apprentice designed a component improvement that was adopted across an entire vehicle platform. 2 years later, another became one of the youngest lead engineers in company history. The program continued growing. Not because it was expensive, not because it generated headlines, because it worked. And every time a new apprentice walked through the doors, Ethan remembered something his daughter had written in her notebook on the day everything changed. Some people think the smartest person in the room is the one standing on the stage. Sometimes it's the person carrying the box. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe now, like this video, and share it with someone who needs the reminder. New stories every week.